Friends, thank you for being here today. What if I told you that the future of global trade is being decided not in the bustling ports of Singapore or Rotterdam, but in a tiny frozen town of less than 900 people at the edge of the world? And what if that town's sudden rise was the result of a quiet, high stakes geopolitical gamble fueled by the single greatest challenge of our time? In the remote, sprawling north of Canada, where the boreal forest gives way to the stark expanse of the tundra along the edge of the Arctic, something massive is rising out of the ice. The landscape, for generations defined by its stillness and isolation, is now punctuated by the hum of activity. Freighters, heavy with steel, navigate frigid waters to unload their cargo. The long arms of cranes slice through the persistent fog, their movements deliberate and strange against the ancient horizon. Through the brief, intense summers and the long, dark winters, engineers work around the clock, their efforts illuminated by powerful floodlights that cast an ethereal glow upon the ice. This is not a rush for oil, nor is it a hunt for precious minerals. The purpose of this immense undertaking is something far more strategic, a quiet but determined move in a global game whose rules are being rewritten by a warming planet. Hundreds of millions of dollars are being poured into this frozen earth, yet outside of a small circle of planners and politicians, almost no one knows why. There is no highway leading to this place. No ribbon of asphalt connects it to the bustling cities of the South. The nearest major metropolitan center is a world away, and there is no obvious economic driver, no clear commercial logic for a deep water port of this scale to exist here. Its very presence is an anomaly, a puzzle set against a backdrop of endless ice and sky. That is, unless its purpose isn't truly about trade in the conventional sense, at least not yet. A few years ago, the captain of a cargo ship navigating the vast and often treacherous waters of Hudson Bay stumbled upon this site almost by accident. What she saw was a stark contradiction: a massive modern construction site flourishing in the middle of absolute nowhere, a full 1,000 kilometers from the nearest major city. It was a scene that defied explanation, a hive of industry in a land defined by its emptiness. What that captain witnessed was not a ghost port, an abandoned relic of some forgotten boom. Instead, it was the physical manifestation of Canada's quiet, calculated plan to secure its future in the high north. As the planet warms and the permanent ice of the Arctic recedes at an unprecedented rate, new shipping routes are emerging from the melt. These routes, particularly the fabled Northwest Passage, are more than just geographical curiosities. They represent a fundamental reordering of global logistics. They are pathways worth an estimated $500 billion a year in commerce, routes that are a staggering 6,000 kilometers shorter than the traditional paths that wind through the Suez and Panama canals. And this forgotten town, a small, resilient community of just 870 people, a place geographically closer to the North Pole than to Toronto, now finds itself sitting directly at the center of it all. Canada is quietly investing $800 million to rebuild its Arctic gateway. If their foresight is correct, this tiny, isolated port could one day shape the future of global trade itself. This is Churchill, a small Arctic port on the edge of Hudson Bay, Canada's quietest project and its boldest, most consequential gamble yet. To truly understand why a nation would stake so much on such a remote outpost, you first need to see just how remarkable its geography really is. Churchill is perched at 58.8 degrees north on the western shore of Hudson Bay, a massive inland sea of breathtaking scale. Stretching across more than 1.2 million square kilometers, Hudson Bay is an immense body of water larger than Germany and France combined. But its size alone is not what makes it so strategically vital. Unlike most of the ice choked waters of the high Arctic, Hudson Bay holds a unique and decisive advantage. Through the wide channel of the Hudson Strait, it connects directly to the vast expanse of the Atlantic Ocean, forming a natural deep water shipping corridor that penetrates far into the very heart of the North American continent. It is a marine highway gifted by nature, a direct route into the continent's interior. And then there is the feature that elevates Churchill from merely promising to truly special. It is the only Arctic port in all of North America with a direct rail link to the continent's vast and fertile grain belt. This is not just a spur line, it is a critical artery of commerce known as the Hudson Bay Railway. This iron spine runs for nearly 1,000 kilometers, a steel thread stretching from the agricultural heartland of Winnipeg all the way to the docks of Churchill. This railway ties the Arctic coast directly into Canada's breadbasket and, by extension, into the sprawling continental rail network that crisscrosses the United States and Canada. That powerful combination, deep water Arctic access on one hand and direct continental rail connections on the other, makes Churchill one of the most strategically valuable port locations in the entire North. Under ideal conditions, ships sailing from Europe can reach Churchill in as little as 7 days. For comparison, the journey to Montreal through the often congested St. Lawrence Seaway takes roughly 2 weeks. But Churchill's real game changing advantage lies not in its current capabilities, but in something far bigger and more transformative: climate change. The silent, inexorable force reshaping our planet is the primary catalyst for Churchill's renaissance. The data is stark and unambiguous. Since 1980, the ice cover on Hudson Bay has diminished by nearly 50%. What was once a region locked in ice for most of the year is now experiencing a profound shift. The viable shipping season, once a brief and frantic window in the height of summer, now stretches reliably from July through November. And the projections compiled by the world's leading climate scientists suggest that this is only the beginning. By the year 2040, Hudson Bay could be open to navigation almost year round. As the ancient ice continues to melt across the wider Arctic archipelago, opening the full length of the Northwest Passage, Churchill's position becomes even more critical. It becomes the natural, logical stopover point for ships traveling the Great Circle route between Europe and Asia through Canada's northern waters. It now sits near the crossroads of three emerging shipping corridors that could completely redefine the flow of global trade. Analysts poring over shipping data and climate models estimate that by the year 2050, these new Arctic routes could carry around 5% of total world shipping. This is not a niche market. It is a volume of commerce worth more than $500 billion every single year. And if even a small fraction of that immense traffic flows through the Hudson Strait and into Hudson Bay, this once forgotten outpost could rapidly become one of North America's most valuable and indispensable gateways. The economic logic is simple and compelling. A modern cargo ship traveling from Hamburg, Germany to Shanghai, China, through the Arctic covers a distance of about 15,000 kilometers. The traditional route, which requires passage through the Suez Canal, is approximately 21,000 kilometers long. That difference translates into a journey that is a full 12 days shorter. For a massive container ship, those 12 days can save as much as $500,000 in fuel costs on a single voyage. In the razor thin margins of the global shipping industry, such savings are not just an advantage, they are a revolution. Yet, Canada's interest in Churchill was not always rooted in such grand global ambitions. For many decades, the port served a much humbler, though vital, role. It was primarily a grain export facility, a seasonal outlet for shipping prairie wheat to European markets during the brief summer season when Hudson Bay was free of ice. It was a reliable, if limited, part of Canada's agricultural supply chain. But in the year 2016, everything changed. The previous owner of the port and the vital railway, an American company named Omnitros, found itself in a challenging position. After a series of legal disputes and facing mounting operational costs, the company's commitment to the Northern Line was already wavering. Then, a catastrophic flood during the spring thaw washed out critical sections of the rail line, severing the only land connection between Churchill and the South. For nearly 2 years, the town was completely cut off from the outside world. Food, fuel, and all essential supplies had to be flown in at exorbitant cost. The lifeline that had sustained the community for a century had been broken. It seemed as if Churchill was dying, destined to become another ghost town on the edge of the wilderness. Then, as government analysts and strategists in Ottawa were assessing the long term viability of the region, they made a startling discovery. The data coming in from satellites and Arctic research stations revealed that Hudson Bay was thawing decades faster than even the most aggressive climate models had previously predicted. New projections showed that Churchill could see virtually ice free conditions for most of the year by the early 2030s, far earlier than any other deep water port in the North American Arctic. That single discovery reframed everything. An ice free Churchill was no longer just a struggling grain terminal, it was a strategic foothold in the rapidly emerging Arctic trade network, a front row seat to the future of global commerce. This realization occurred within a rapidly shifting geopolitical landscape. The race for the Arctic was already well underway as other nations moved decisively to stake their claims in the high north. Russia, with the world's longest Arctic coastline, was actively militarizing its northern frontier, building new bases and deploying advanced weaponry while heavily promoting its northern sea route as a viable alternative to the Suez. China, though not technically an Arctic nation, was making substantial investments in infrastructure across the polar region, branding its strategy as the Polar Silk Road and projecting its economic power into this new arena. Even the United States, which had historically been slow to focus on its northern flank, was scrambling to upgrade its limited Arctic port capacity in Alaska. Against this backdrop of intense international competition, Canada's leaders looked at their maps and saw Churchill. Here was a deep water port with existing, albeit damaged, infrastructure, and most importantly, that irreplaceable rail connection. It was perfectly positioned to control access to the eastern entrance of the Northwest Passage. The strategic calculus had changed. In 2018, a consortium of Canadian investors, including several Indigenous groups and backed by significant federal funding, purchased Churchill's port and rail infrastructure for $117 million. But this was just the beginning. Within months, the financial commitments began to grow exponentially. Ottawa pledged a figure that would eventually exceed $800 million for comprehensive upgrades. This wasn't a simple repair mission, it was a complete modernization. The plan included deepening the harbor to accommodate larger, modern vessels, completely rebuilding the damaged rail line, reinforcing bridges to handle heavier loads, and installing new state of the art cargo handling systems capable of operating efficiently in extreme cold. What had started as a rescue mission for a dying town had quietly evolved into a core pillar of a new national strategy. To secure a permanent Canadian presence in the Arctic economy and to strengthen the nation's sovereignty over the vast contested waters that surround it. The urgency behind this national strategy cannot be overstated, as it represents a belated Western response to a geopolitical chessboard that is being aggressively redrawn by its rivals. Russia's Arctic ambitions, for instance, go far beyond simple militarization. Moscow views its northern sea route not merely as a domestic shipping lane, but as a global toll road that it alone will control. Its unparalleled fleet of dozens of nuclear powered icebreakers, a capability no other nation comes close to matching, gives it the power to dictate the terms of passage. The state owned enterprise Rosatom now manages the route, effectively turning Arctic transit into a source of revenue and a tool of geopolitical leverage. Any nation wishing to use this shortcut will be dependent on Russian escorts, Russian ports, and Russian goodwill, creating a strategic vulnerability that deeply concerns Western planners. Simultaneously, China's Polar Silk Road is a masterclass in long term strategic positioning. By styling itself a near Arctic state, Beijing has forcefully inserted itself into a region where it has no territorial claims. Its investments are not random, they are strategic wedges. By financing infrastructure in Iceland, establishing research stations with dual use potential for seabed mapping, and entering into resource partnerships with Moscow, China is ensuring it will be an indispensable player in the Arctic's future. It is playing a long game, securing access not just to shipping lanes, but to the region's vast untapped reserves of fish, minerals, oil, and natural gas. This concerted push by Russia and China has exposed a significant capability gap for the West. The United States, for example, possesses only a handful of aging non nuclear icebreakers, leaving it functionally unable to guarantee year round access or presence in its own Arctic territory, let alone project power across the region. This creates a dangerous vacuum. An Arctic dominated by Russian and Chinese interests could fundamentally challenge NATO's northern flank, provide new stealthy routes for submarines to enter the Atlantic, and become a new front for great power competition. In this high stakes context, Churchill is transformed from a mere commercial project into a critical strategic asset for Canada and its allies. It is a forward operating base in a region of growing contention, a tangible symbol of a democratic presence, and a vital node for surveillance and control in a part of the world that can no longer be considered a remote and peaceful periphery. It is a crucial, if late, move in a game for the top of the world. The momentum is now clear and undeniable. In 2023, dozens of commercial vessels successfully transited the Northwest Passage, a significant increase from just a decade ago. And while that number is still just a tiny fraction of total global trade, the trajectory is unmistakable. Each passing summer brings longer ice free windows, stronger and more capable icebreakers, and a growing number of major shipping companies testing Arctic routes that were once thought to be the exclusive domain of explorers and adventurers. The reason for this shift is simple and powerful: economics. However, despite its immense potential, the Arctic still suffers from a critical infrastructure deficit that prevents these voyages from becoming routine. It is a vast ocean highway with no service stations. Between the North Atlantic and the Bering Strait, a distance spanning thousands of kilometers, there are no major deep water ports that can handle large modern vessels or provide reliable refueling, resupply, or maintenance services. This is the critical gap that Churchill is poised to fill. Perched on the western edge of Hudson Bay, it is the only port on the entire Canadian Arctic coastline with direct rail access to the rest of North America. It is the missing link. From this pivotal location, cargo can move efficiently in both directions, creating a dynamic two-way hub for international trade. Northward, goods from the continental heartland, grain from the prairies, minerals from northern mines, and manufactured goods from Ontario and Quebec can move up the rail line to Churchill and be loaded onto ships bound for the great Arctic shipping lanes. This provides exporters across the prairies, Ontario, and even the U.S. Midwest with a route to European or Asian markets that is 5 to 7 days faster than traditional routes. Southward, goods arriving from Asia can be offloaded at Churchill and moved efficiently down the rail line, reaching Canadian and American markets faster and cheaper than those coming through the chronically congested Pacific ports of Vancouver or Los Angeles. The port's expansion is already sparking a wave of economic activity across the province of Manitoba. Rail maintenance crews, construction workers, and logistics operators are back at work, breathing new life into the regional economy. And for the first time in decades, local businesses in Churchill are seeing steady, reliable cargo movement throughout the entire shipping season. Churchill is no longer just an isolated point on the map. It is the crucial missing link in the emerging Arctic trade network. And as the world desperately searches for alternatives to congested and vulnerable choke points like the Suez and Panama canals, that link is becoming more valuable with every passing year. But the immense investment in Churchill is not just about economics, it is a powerful and unambiguous statement of sovereignty. Canada lays claim to the waters of the Northwest Passage, viewing them as internal waters, an integral part of its national territory. However, that claim is disputed by the United States and several other maritime nations who argue that the passage should be classified as an international strait open to the vessels of all countries. In the harsh and unforgiving reality of the Arctic, legal claims and historical precedent are not enough. The only way to truly strengthen a claim to sovereignty is through active presence and demonstrable control. This means building ports, conducting patrols, and having people living and working in the region. This is where Churchill plays such a crucial and indispensable role. A functioning, bustling Canadian port on the shores of Hudson Bay demonstrates real, tangible jurisdiction over Arctic waters. Every ship that refuels in its harbor, every ton of cargo that moves across its docks reinforces the fundamental idea that this is Canadian territory, a region governed, regulated, and actively used by Canadians. The port also directly addresses Canada's growing Arctic security concerns. The number of Russian and Chinese vessels operating in Arctic waters is increasing. These ships are often conducting research activities that, to the trained eye of defense analysts, look a lot like military reconnaissance. Churchill gives Canada a strategic base for monitoring and controlling Arctic shipping. From its harbor, Coast Guard cutters and new Arctic patrol vessels can operate more effectively, supporting vital missions such as search and rescue, environmental monitoring, and maritime security. The federal government has committed over $2 billion to strengthen Arctic defense and surveillance capabilities, a strategy that includes new patrol ships, advanced satellite systems, and critical infrastructure centered around the Churchill hub. At the same time, the Churchill Marine Observatory, which opened in 2021, is at the forefront of Arctic science, tracking sea ice conditions, studying fragile marine ecosystems, and monitoring pollution risks. This research is essential for helping Canada manage the significant environmental stakes of an opening Arctic. Together, these parallel efforts in commerce, defense, and science are transforming Churchill from a small, isolated port town into a multifaceted strategic outpost, one that anchors Canada's presence in a region undergoing a rapid and profound transformation. Because in the Arctic, sovereignty is not simply declared, it is demonstrated day after day. The impact of this national investment is already reshaping the local and regional economy in profound ways. Employment in the town of Churchill has increased steadily since 2018, with a host of new jobs created in port operations, rail maintenance, logistics, and various support services. After decades of decline, the town's population has stabilized and has even begun to grow again. For the first time in a generation, young people who had left to find opportunities elsewhere are returning to Churchill, drawn by the new economic prospects and the town's unique central position in the burgeoning Arctic economy. But the economic impact extends far beyond the town limits of Churchill itself. The revitalized port is creating a cascade of new opportunities throughout Manitoba and the wider prairie provinces. Grain farmers can now access European markets more efficiently and with lower transportation costs, increasing their competitiveness on the global stage. Meanwhile, manufacturers in the heart of the continent gain access to shorter, faster shipping routes to the booming markets of Asia. The federal government projects that Churchill's full development will generate $15 billion in economic activity over the next 20 years. This impressive figure includes direct port revenues, fees from rail transportation, and significant multiplier effects that will ripple throughout the entire regional economy. Churchill is also rapidly becoming a vibrant center for Arctic innovation. Companies are flocking to the region to develop and test new technologies specifically designed for cold weather port operations, such as ice capable cargo handling equipment and sophisticated Arctic shipping logistics software. The University of Manitoba has established a major Arctic research station in Churchill, attracting top international researchers who are studying the impacts of climate change, the health of marine ecosystems, and the complexities of Arctic shipping. This intense research activity is creating a dynamic, knowledge based economy that exists alongside the more traditional resource and transportation sectors, diversifying the region's economic base for the future. Crucially, indigenous communities in the region are positioned as major partners and beneficiaries of Churchill's development. The port's new ownership structure ensures that these communities have a direct stake in its success, providing employment opportunities and funding for business development while respecting traditional land use and addressing critical environmental concerns. The success of Churchill could reshape not just Canada's economy, but the entire future of Arctic trade itself. Major European shipping companies are already exploring the possibility of forming long term partnerships to use Churchill as their primary North American gateway. At the same time, Asian manufacturers are eyeing the port as a promising alternative to the congested West Coast ports of North America, seeing it as a route that offers faster access to continental markets and provides freedom from the vulnerabilities of traditional choke points like the Suez and Panama canals. But this historic opportunity comes with intense competition. Russia's Northern Sea route is expanding rapidly, backed by a growing fleet of powerful icebreakers and massive state investment. China continues to pour billions of dollars into its so called Polar Silk Road, building influence and infrastructure across the region. Other nations, from Scandinavia to Asia, are rushing to stake their own claims in the high north. The global race for Arctic dominance has already begun, and the stakes are incredibly high. Churchill's rise also brings with it a profound sense of responsibility. More ships in these sensitive waters mean greater risks to fragile ecosystems, to the critical migration routes of whales and polar bears, and to the pristine quality of Arctic waters. Climate change may be opening new corridors for trade, but it is also fueling unpredictable ice patterns and extreme weather events that could disrupt operations just as easily as it enables them. For Canada, the challenge is clear and multifaceted. It must find a way to balance its legitimate economic ambitions with a deep and unwavering commitment to environmental stewardship. It must keep its promise to support the long term sustainable development of its northern communities. The $800 million invested so far, as substantial as it is only the beginning. Maintaining Churchill as a world class competitive port will demand continuous funding, constant upgrades to its infrastructure, and, perhaps most importantly, unwavering political will through successive governments. But if Canada stays the course, the reward could be historic. By the early 2030s, this tiny port, home to just 870 people, could be handling a significant share of the trade that flows between Europe and Asia. It could become a powerful symbol of how geography, strategy, and bold vision can converge to redefine a nation's place in the world. What once seemed impossible, a thriving, modern port rising from a frozen, forgotten frontier, could soon stand as definitive proof that Canada can and will shape its own Arctic destiny. From a forgotten outpost on the brink of extinction to a strategic Arctic gateway, Churchill now represents more than just a town. It represents a nation's audacious bet on the future of the North and perhaps on the future of global trade itself. Because sometimes, in the grand sweep of history, the biggest risks really do create the biggest opportunities. Canada is betting on Churchill because its leaders see what the rest of the world is only just beginning to realize, that the Arctic is the next great frontier of global power, and this tiny, resilient port is its gateway.